Now, we have more on one of our key stories today about this bloke who's made a career out of being a burglar. His name is Aaron Peter James Wilson. He's 35 years old with a criminal history that runs 80 pages long and spans 122 convictions. Wilson was sentenced yesterday in Brisbane District Court after his latest crime spree, where he burgled 11 homes in a month. This was all on Brisbane's north side, netting $270,000 in stolen goods, and receives a sentence of less than 2 years in prison and is free to be released right now. For more on this, I'm joined by Bond University criminologist and former detective Terry Goldsworthy. Thanks for joining us, Terry.
Yeah, thanks, Dan.
What's your initial reaction to hearing about this 650-day sentence for a career burglar?
Look, I've got to say I'm not surprised by it. And I guess, if we go back and look at some basic principles around sentencing is that, there's a number of reasons why the court sentence people. One is punishment, there's rehabilitation, there's deterrence both for the person and the general community. There's issue of denunciation of the person, also protection of the community and keeping them safe. Unfortunately, what we've seen is the community protection aspect of sentencing has tended to be neglected to some degree. I did see in this one that the judge, made mention of this fellow's history and, outlined that there was an overriding community need for protection. But as you pointed out, he got a 6-year sentence, head sentence, which is the full term, and he was eligible for parole after having served 653 days. So basically he served 1/3 of his sentence.
So why is that, Terry? It's less than a third. I mean, the judge sounded appalled at what he'd done and did also seem unsure he could actually be rehabilitated. A 6-year sentence, most people probably still in the community might want more, but that seemed pretty fair. How does that non-parole portion end up being less than 30% of the head sentence?
Yeah, look, that's quite often the way it works out. The Queensland Sentencing Council looked at about 10 years' worth of data for people who commit burglaries, the same type of offences that this fellow did. And what they found for adult offenders, less than half of them got imprisoned. And of those who were imprisoned, the average imprisonment period was 1.5 years. Now, to put that in perspective for your readers, for just a standard burglary, the maximum sentence is 14 years. And for a burglary committed with circumstance of aggravation, things like in the night time, being armed in company, etc., it's up to lifetime imprisonment. So clearly when you have these maximums, you're getting nowhere near the maximum. And that's where the discretion of the courts come into play in terms of looking at, what's the purpose they're sentencing for, and also the factors they use to come to that sentence, which is case law, looking at the circumstances of the person, which obviously the judge did in this case, whether they've cooperated with the police, pleaded guilty, etc., and their previous history.
And yet in this case still comes up with this fairly low sentence with such a long, criminal history, 80 pages of criminal history. The community, as you know, they get so fed up with this stuff, Terry, they feel that courts are too soft on career criminals like these. What is the solution to actually fixing this?
Well, the issue is, as you said, we have these penalties of 14 years in life, but we never get anywhere near them in terms of reality of sentencing. So I see a number of media releases have come out today from the police minister talking about the new heavier sentences put in place last week or the week before, where they're talking about the consultation will continue with the community in relation to the new laws. Those new laws that we put out for youth justice responses a couple of weeks ago are really problematic because they increase the maximum sentence. And as our discussion here today showed, that you hardly ever get the maximum sentence. You get nowhere near it. What they perhaps should be considering is, in terms of the youth offending and also for some adult offenders, obviously this is an adult offender, is looking at tightening the bail so that there is an exclusion of people being able to access bail where they are repeated recidivist offenders who commit offences on bail. It shouldn't be a show cause situation. It should just be that you don't get out if you breach that right. And, there may be some consideration to putting in place if the Premier, who in her comments expressed some concern about the judges being out of touch well, if she feels that strongly, maybe she needs to consider putting in place some minimum penalties so that the courts must engage in a certain amount of sentencing.
And just those new measures you're talking about, they came out in relation to the horrendous murder of North Lake's mum, Emma Lovell, and that policy came out straight after Christmas from the Premier. Anastasia Palaszczuk announced that. She at least seems more interested in a tougher approach now, or wanting to sound like she's having a tougher approach. But do you think you're of the view those measures aren't going to have much impact?
Well, I mean, if you look at the first tranche of youth justice responses that came out just over a year ago, most of them achieved nothing. I mean, like the electronic monitoring devices, we had, I think the report told us that reviewed them, had a look at that, and it said 3 had been issued at a cost of $11 million. So I think the government has been forced into acting due to the community anger. I mean, when you have 150,000 people signing a petition to do something about crime in a matter of 24, 48 hours, the government, I think, gets a sniff in the wind that law and order is going to be an election issue, and that will be the case because if you look at property crime, the rate is up 17% for the last 12 months. Stolen cars are up 20% for the last 12 months, and the crime rate's up 8% overall in Queensland for the last 12 months. So I think law and order will be a particular issue of debate for both the LNP and Labor to see what they can do about bringing it back into control.
I'm speaking with Bond University criminologist Terry Goldsworthy. Terry, just coming back to this career burglar, Aaron Peter James Wilson, you mentioned electronic ankle bracelets. One of the other parts of his offending was he'd actually cut one of those off in the past. What do you think the state government needs to do that could better address cases like this career burglar, who's free to be released any day now and will no doubt be back to the only thing he's ever really known, stealing from people's homes?
Well, that's right. And, this applies equally to youth offending to adult offending is, there's multifactorial causations to the offending. And we saw in this case, they talked about drug use, problematic childhood, etc. Those things contribute. They certainly don't excuse criminal behaviour. So you have what I talk about as the short-term offending cycle where someone is out and about committing offences like this guy did in a month, 11 houses. You've got to break that short-term offending cycle. The therapeutic multifactorial responses are a long-term offending cycle issue that you need to address. So in his 600 days plus in jail, you would say, okay, well, what action was taken to give him some kind of skill set that when he comes out, he doesn't automatically go back to 1, drug use, and 2, offending, So I think long-term, yes, we do have to look at this and go, are we just going to accept that this guy's going to keep getting locked up and do jail, or are we going to try and give him some kind of skill set that he may go out and work? And there's a very small proportion of people who commit criminal offences who just go on to commit criminal offences. You will never rehabilitate them.
Well, they call them correctional facilities, but I don't know that many people in the community feel like anyone's actually getting corrected while they're in there.
Well, that's it. The recidivism rate for burglary sits about 25%. They go on to repeat offences within 5 years of getting out. So, some people can be rehabilitated. We can't write that off. But, are those services there? Because you've got to deal with the short-term offending cycle, stop them. If they're on a drug bender, they've got to be removed from the community to stop that drug offending. But long-term, you've got to see, well, is this person someone we can rehabilitate? Someone that can be turned from offending to non-offending. And you can do it, but it's not cheap. It's not quick. It's a slow, expensive process. And sometimes I don't know if the government has an appetite for that nor the budget for that.
No, they do seem to like a quick fix to things. How do you think the people in the community who are obviously... We're all seeing these break-ins, these burglaries. We all know someone in southeast Queensland who's been broken into. How do you think they'll be feeling today just hearing that, someone who's done it this long, 122 convictions, serves under 2 years jail?
Well, look, I think they'd be concerned. I mean, especially when the public have great difficulty when you say to them, the maximum penalty is 14 years, and then they find out that they did 2 years. With the substantial 80-page history you're talking about, they would probably think, well, that is the type of person who surely would be getting close to the maximum, and clearly they don't.
Absolutely. Terry Goldsworthy, as always, thank you very much for your time on this topic.
Of all the wonders in all the world, there is nothing more special than hearing your child's heartbeat for the first time for a bento lunchbox for just $12.99. In your choice of 3 colourful designs with 4 spacious compartments for different snacks and foods, it's special you can buy at the Back to School sale. In store while stocks last. This Wednesday at Aldi. Good. Different.